In 1911, a man walked out of the wilderness and into the 20th century. He was starving, exhausted, and terrified. Within hours, anthropologists descended on him like he was an archaeological discovery. They measured his skull, recorded his language, and put him to work demonstrating stone tools in a museum. His name was Ishi. And he wasn't just the last of his tribe. He was the last person on Earth who spoke Yahi, a language that had survived 10,000 years of human history. When he died 5 years later, an entire way of understanding the world died with him. But here's what the textbooks don't tell you. The day the soldiers arrived in his homeland 60 years earlier, Ishi's grandfather said something the interpreters heard but never wrote down. Something that, if you understand the economic forces at play, explains not just what happened to the Yahi people, but what's been happening to indigenous populations for the past 500 years. This isn't a story about cultural loss. It's a story about economic extraction. And once you see the pattern, you can't unsee it. If you want to understand how modern economies actually function, how wealth gets transferred from populations to empires, subscribe now. Because what happened to Ishi's people is still happening today, just with different weapons. The Yahi people lived in Northern California, in the foothills of Mount Lassen. For at least 4,000 years they had occupied the same territory, same rivers, same hunting grounds, same acorn groves that fed them every autumn. They had achieved something modern economists consider impossible, a truly sustainable economy. They took from their environment exactly what it could regenerate. No more, no less. For 4 millennia, they practiced landscape-level resource management. Controlled burns in oak forests at precise intervals increased acorn yields by 300%, without ploughing, without irrigation, without depleting soil. 4,000 years of economic stability, no market crashes, no resource depletion, no systemic collapse. Then, in 1848, someone found gold in the Sierra Nevada foothills. Within months, 300,000 people flooded into California. Within a decade, the Yahi population dropped from around 400 to fewer than 50. The California gold rush is taught as a story of American ambition. What it actually was, economically speaking, was forced resource extraction, and indigenous populations were the first resource extracted. Gold mining required labor and logistics. How do you feed 300,000 people in a region with no infrastructure? The answer was indigenous knowledge. The Yahi knew which plants were edible, which game migrations were predictable, which water sources stayed viable through drought. Early mining camps offered trade, tools and blankets for knowledge about food and water. But the miners were getting knowledge that took millennia to accumulate, knowledge with infinite reuse value. In exchange, indigenous populations got mass-produced goods that wore out in a season. Once the miners had that knowledge, the guides became economically redundant. And here's where the incentives aligned horrifically. Dead indigenous populations don't require ongoing payments, don't assert land claims. From a cost-benefit standpoint, extermination was cheaper than cooperation. California instituted the Indian Indenture Act in 1850. Indigenous people could be arrested for vagrancy and auctioned as laborers. Children could be taken and apprenticed. Between 1850 and 1863, California paid over $1.7 million in bounties for Native American scalps. The state budget had line items for Indian extermination. This wasn't random violence. It was economic policy, systematized, funded, optimized. The Yahi watched this happen to neighboring tribes, the Maidu, the Wintu, the Yana, each group approached by settlers asking for help. Then, once settlers had learned the geography, the guides became redundant. The Yahi saw the pattern, so they hid. They retreated into terrain so rugged settlers considered it worthless. For 40 years they survived, their population dwindling to fewer than 10. They weren't killed in one massacre. They were killed by economic marginalization. Once pushed off their land, they lost access to their resource base. The acorn groves were now on settler property, deer migration routes blocked by fences, salmon runs diverted from mining. This is what economists call enclosure, the conversion of common resources into private property. The Yahi went from unlimited access to their resource base to being criminal trespassers on land their ancestors had managed for 4 millennia. By 1865, cattle ranching replaced gold mining. Ranchers fenced entire watersheds, diverted streams, hunted deer to near extinction, Every rational economic decision cut another resource stream from the Yahi. By 1870, maybe a dozen Yahi remained. They had no children. Around 1860, they'd made a collective decision to stop having children. They looked at their situation and concluded that bringing new life into their world was cruelty. Then, in 1908, a surveying team stumbled onto their camp while mapping land for a power company. The surveyors took everything. The Yahi fled, 3 drowned trying to escape. Ishi survived. For 3 more years he lived completely alone. In 1911, starving and sick, he walked into a slaughterhouse in Oroville. He had given up. Anthropologists from the University of California heard about Ishi within days. Alfred Kroeber offered him a deal. Live at the museum, demonstrate your skills, let us record your language. In exchange, food, shelter, and $5 per week. For 5 years. Ishi demonstrated Yahi techniques, fire starting, obsidian blades, rope making, acorn processing, weather prediction. The university acquired a complete indigenous knowledge system for $780 total, and they got exclusive IP rights. Ishi wasn't recognized as a legal person capable of holding intellectual property. The techniques were economically valuable. Acorn processing produced more calories per acre than wheat without irrigation or fertilizer. Oak trees provided reliable crops without soil depletion. Ishi demonstrated sustainable high-yield food production requiring 0 fossil fuel inputs, but that information never got implemented at scale. It got archived. If Yahi techniques had been adopted widely, they would have devalued land holdings and undermined California agriculture. Wheat farmers had invested millions in plows, irrigation systems, grain elevators. If oak forest management proved more productive, all that capital would become worthless. So the knowledge got preserved but not applied, turned into cultural heritage instead of economic competition. Ishi died in 1916. Tuberculosis, likely contracted from the anthropologists. The University of California generated thousands of pages of documentation, built an academic subdiscipline on his knowledge, then moved on. But the economic value didn't stay in journals. In the 1930s, those primitive techniques appeared in Boy Scout manuals, not credited, not compensated. In the 1970s, the Back to the Land movement rediscovered acorn processing. Permaculture emerged, built on indigenous practices, documented, then rebranded. Today, wilderness survival is a multi-million-dollar industry. Bushcraft videos generate 6-figure revenues. Every technique traces back to indigenous populations. The knowledge has been laundered through enough iterations that nobody acknowledges its source. This is how modern economies work, not through dramatic conquest, but through patient knowledge extraction. You document everything people know, then you repackage that knowledge, strip it of cultural context, and sell it back to the market as innovation. But here's what brings us back to the beginning. What Ishi's grandfather said the day the soldiers arrived. We only know about it because of one anthropologist's private notes discovered decades later. Notes never meant for publication. When the Yahi elders saw the first armed settlers approaching, Ishi's grandfather didn't ask what they wanted. He asked how long it would take. Not how long, until the Yahi were killed. He knew that was inevitable. He was asking how long before the settlers extracted what they wanted and left, how long before the land recovered. Because from the Yahi economic perspective, this was a resource boom. Booms always end. The land always remains. The Yahi had seen boom cycles before. Deer populations crashing when too many predators moved in, then recovering. Oak groves failing during droughts, then regenerating. Their entire economic model was built on understanding these cycles. Boom, depletion, recovery. The Yahi elders calculated that if they could hide for 1 or 2 generations, the settlers would extract the gold and leave. The forests would regenerate. The salmon would return. It was economically sound reasoning. Every resource extraction boom in history had followed that pattern. Rapid exploitation, depletion, abandonment, recovery. Look at whaling in the 1800s. Whalers decimated Atlantic populations, moved to the Pacific, then the Arctic. By the 1860s, whale oil became scarce. Then petroleum was discovered and whaling collapsed. Whalers left, whale populations recovered. The Yahi expected the same pattern. What they didn't understand was that this boom was different. Because it wasn't just about gold, it was about land itself. Previous resource booms were about taking something and leaving. Fur trappers took furs and moved on. Loggers took timber and moved on. But settlers weren't taking resources. They were taking productive capacity, the land itself. This was a new economics, not extraction and departure, extraction and permanent occupation. And this is where the economic model fundamentally shifted. Once you're occupying land permanently, your incentives change completely. You're not maximizing short-term extraction, you're establishing permanent property rights. That means eliminating competing claims. That means removing indigenous populations permanently, because if they're alive, they can come back and assert claims, but if they're dead, your property rights are secure. The Yahi waited for the settlers to leave. The settlers never left. And 40 years later, Ishi walked into that slaughterhouse because he finally understood. There was no waiting this out. The economic model had fundamentally changed. This is what revisionist economic history reveals. The transition from extraction-based to occupation-based economics wasn't natural evolution. It was a choice, a decision made by people who realized temporary exploitation left money on the table. If you can take the gold and the land, why just take the gold? If you can extract indigenous knowledge and eliminate the population, why pay ongoing royalties? It's more efficient, more profitable, more permanent. Once that model was established in California in the 1850s, it spread from the Amazon to the Congo to the Arctic. Find an indigenous population with valuable knowledge or resources, extract what you need, marginalize the population until they can't resist, occupy the territory permanently, rewrite the history so it looks like progress instead of theft. In the Amazon, rubber companies extracted knowledge from indigenous populations about rubber trees, then enslaved them to harvest. When synthetic rubber came, companies left, but they'd secured land rights. The populations were decimated. The land stayed occupied. In the Congo, Leopold's agents extracted knowledge about ivory and rubber sources, then instituted a terror regime killing 10 million people. Extract knowledge, extract resources, eliminate population, secure permanent control. In the Arctic, whaling companies extracted Inuit knowledge about whale migration. Then oil companies moved in, extracted knowledge about ice conditions and seasonal patterns. The Inuit knowledge that enabled billion-dollar extraction generated nothing for the Inuit. Their communities remain among the poorest in North America. The pattern is global. The mechanism is identical. Ishi's story isn't unique. It's just unusually well documented. But here's the part that should terrify you. This model is still operating. It's just moved from physical resources to digital ones, accelerating to speeds incomprehensible to Ishi's grandfather. The boom-bust cycle that took 40 years in the gold rush now completes in 18 months in tech startups. Companies extract data and behavioral knowledge from users, build platforms, achieve dominance, extract maximum value, then collapse or get acquired. Think about what happens when tech companies enter new markets. They offer free services, study user behavior, document how people solve problems, then build platforms that replace local solutions with centralized systems they control. Let me give you specific examples of how this extraction model operates today. Google Books. In 2004, Google started digitizing books. They called it the Library Project. The stated goal was making human knowledge universally accessible. The actual economic function was extracting knowledge from physical books, digitizing it, making it searchable through Google's platform. Authors and publishers sued. They lost. The court ruled it fair use because Google was transforming content, not copying it. Google extracted knowledge from millions of books, built a platform worth billions on that knowledge. He paid original creators nothing. YouTube operates on the same model. Before YouTube, if you wanted to learn how to fix a car, cook a specific dish, or play a musical instrument, you bought instructional books, or took classes from local experts. Local knowledge held by local experts generated local income. YouTube convinced millions to upload instructional videos for free. Those videos now generate billions in advertising revenue. YouTube takes 45%. The people who actually teach the skills, the ones who created the knowledge, get 55% of ad revenue if they're lucky. Most get nothing because they don't meet monetization thresholds. YouTube didn't create any knowledge. They just built a platform that extracted it from communities and centralized it. Wikipedia runs on extracted knowledge. Millions of people contribute information for free. The Wikimedia Foundation, which operates Wikipedia, has an annual budget over $160 million. The people who actually write the articles get nothing. They're told they're contributing to human knowledge. They are. but someone else is monetizing that contribution. Facebook's entire business model is knowledge extraction. Users share their lives, preferences, social connections, interests. Facebook documents all of it, builds behavioral models, sells that information to advertisers for billions. Users get access to a free platform. Facebook gets a complete psychological and social profile of 3 billion people. That's the trade. You give us everything about yourself and we'll let you use our service. It's the same deal Ishi got. Give us your knowledge and we'll give you room and board in our system. Amazon does this with sellers. Small businesses upload their products to Amazon's marketplace. Amazon documents which products sell well, analyzes the data, reverse engineers the products, creates Amazon Basics versions, and undercuts the original sellers using their own platform. The knowledge about what products work gets extracted from small businesses and used against them. The sellers who built successful products become economically redundant once Amazon has learned which items are profitable. The gig economy platforms perfected this extraction model. Uber and Lyft studied how taxi drivers operated. They documented route optimization, surge pricing patterns, customer behavior. Then they built algorithms that turned that knowledge into automated systems. The drivers who had that knowledge became replaceable. They got offered gig work at ever-decreasing rates, while the platforms captured all the value their knowledge created. This isn't theoretical. Uber and Lyft are systematically reducing driver pay while increasing platform profits. The knowledge has been extracted. The workers are being squeezed. DoorDash does it with restaurants. Restaurants share their menus, pricing, customer bases. DoorDash extracts that data, builds market intelligence, uses it to negotiate better terms. The restaurants have no leverage because DoorDash owns the relationship with customers now. The platform sits between the restaurant and the customer, extracting value from both sides of the transaction. TikTok's algorithm is built on knowledge extracted from users. Every video you watch, every creator you follow, every sound you use teaches the algorithm about human behavior and preference. That knowledge gets turned into a recommendation system worth billions. The users who generated that behavioral data get access to a free app. The value they created gets captured by ByteDance. Artificial intelligence is the final evolution of this extraction model. AI systems are trained on human knowledge. Books, articles, conversations, art, music, code. Everything humans have created gets fed into training models. The AI learns from that accumulated knowledge, then generates content that competes with the people who created the original knowledge. Artists spend years, sometimes decades, developing their skills. AI companies scrape their work without permission, train models on it, create systems that can generate similar art in seconds. The artists get nothing. They're told it's fair use, it's transformative, it's progress, but economically, what's happening is clear. The knowledge these artists developed through years of practice is being extracted and turned into automated systems that will replace them in the marketplace. Writers face the same extraction. Their books and articles get fed into language models without compensation or permission. The models learn their writing styles, their knowledge, their techniques. Then those models get sold as products that can write like humans. The original writers become economically redundant. The knowledge they spent careers developing is now owned by companies that paid them nothing for it. Programmers are watching this happen to their profession right now. Their code gets used to train AI coding assistants. The knowledge they developed over decades of work is being extracted and turned into automated systems that will replace them. They're being offered the Ishi deal. Keep working for us while we document how you do your job, and once we've extracted enough knowledge, we'll eliminate your position. This is happening across every knowledge-based industry. Legal research, medical diagnosis, financial analysis, customer service, translation. The pattern is always the same. Extract knowledge from people, turn that knowledge into automated systems, replace the people with the systems, capture all the economic value. The cycle is the same one that destroyed the Yahi, just faster, more efficient, operating at global scale. And when those workers are no longer needed, when algorithms have learned enough, platforms don't need them anymore. They get replaced by automation. The knowledge remains, the people disappear. We call it disruption instead of displacement, innovation instead of extraction, progress instead of theft. But the pattern is the same. Find a population with valuable knowledge, extract that knowledge, marginalize the population, occupy the economic space permanently. The Yahi understood something we've forgotten. Sustainable economies don't grow indefinitely. They reach equilibrium. They take what can be regenerated and no more. A sustainable economy balances three variables: resource regeneration rate, population size, consumption per capita. The Yahi had optimized all three. They knew exactly how many acorns each forest could produce annually without damaging the trees. They knew how many deer the local population could sustain being hunted without depleting the herd. They knew how many salmon could be taken from each run without depleting future runs. 4,000 years of data on regeneration rates. They kept their population stable at around 400 people because that was what the land could support indefinitely. They didn't grow beyond carrying capacity, not because they couldn't, but because they understood that growth beyond regeneration rate meant eventual collapse. This wasn't religious belief or cultural tradition. It was economic calculation based on millennia of observation. And they kept consumption per capita at exactly the sustainable level. Not austere, not abundant, sufficient. The economic term is steady-state equilibrium. Each generation consumed roughly what the previous generation had consumed. No accumulation, no scarcity, just balance. Modern economics calls that primitive, inefficient, a failure to maximize productive capacity. But think about what maximizing productive capacity actually means. It means extracting more from the land each year than the year before. It means constant growth. And on a finite planet, constant growth is mathematically impossible. The Yahi economy lasted 4,000 years. Modern industrial capitalism has lasted roughly 300 years, and we're already running out of planet. In those 300 years, we've depleted topsoil that took 10 millennia to form. American farmland has lost half its topsoil in just a century of industrial agriculture. We're losing it 50 times faster than it's being replaced. We've exhausted fisheries that have been productive for 10,000 years. 90% of large fish populations in the ocean are gone. We've altered atmospheric chemistry in ways that won't return to baseline for hundreds of thousands of years, possibly millions. We've driven extinction rates to levels not seen since the asteroid that killed the dinosaurs. We're in the 6th mass extinction event in Earth's history, the only one caused by a single species. And we call this progress. We call this economic growth. We call this success. The Yahi economy could have continued another 4,000 years if it had been left alone. Our economy is showing structural failure after just 3 centuries. Climate models predict catastrophic consequences within this century. Economic models show debt levels that can't be sustained. Ecological models show resource depletion that makes current consumption patterns impossible to maintain. Every major system is approaching collapse. And we're still optimizing for growth. Maybe the Yahi weren't the primitives, maybe we are. Here's what makes this particularly tragic. The Yahi had solved the core problem of economics. How do you maintain a stable standard of living indefinitely without depleting your resource base? They'd been running that solution for 4,000 years. It worked, and we destroyed it. Not because we had a better solution, but because their solution didn't generate profit for settlers. A sustainable economy that maintains equilibrium doesn't create opportunities for capital accumulation. There's no growth to invest in, no expansion to finance, no new markets to exploit. From a capitalist perspective, the Yahi economy was worthless, not because it didn't work, but because it didn't grow. And that reveals the fundamental incompatibility between indigenous economic models and modern capitalism. Indigenous economies optimize for sustainability. Capitalist economies optimize for growth. These goals are mutually exclusive. You cannot have infinite growth on a finite planet. At some point, you run out of resources to extract. You run out of populations to exploit. You run out of ecosystems to convert into capital. The Yahi understood this. We don't. Or we do, and we're choosing to ignore it because acknowledging it would require abandoning the economic model that has made some people extraordinarily wealthy. And just like the Yahi couldn't adapt fast enough to the shift from extraction to permanent occupation, most people today can't adapt to the shift from physical resource extraction to knowledge extraction happening at digital speeds. Consider what's happened in just 20 years. In 2004, photographers made livings selling stock photos. Then Instagram and Unsplash convinced millions to upload photos for free. The market for stock photography collapsed. The knowledge of professional photography still had value, but the economic model compensating photographers was destroyed. In 2010, translators made livings translating documents. Then Google Translate and DeepL trained AI on millions of translated texts, mostly scraped without permission. Translation services now cost a fraction of what they did. The knowledge of translation still has value, but translators who develop that knowledge have been marginalized. In 2015, graphic designers made livings designing logos and marketing materials. Then Canva and DALL-E made it possible for anyone to generate professional designs in minutes. Design knowledge still has value, but designers who spent years learning those principles now compete with automated systems trained on their work. This is the acceleration. What took 40 years to happen to the Yahi now happens to entire professions in 5-year cycles. Extract knowledge, automate the knowledge, marginalize the people, capture the value. The people being displaced don't see it as knowledge extraction. They see it as technological progress, creative destruction, inevitable innovation. But economically, it's the same mechanism that destroyed the Yahi. Different technology, identical extraction model. When Ishi died, he was buried in an unmarked grave. But in 1999, his remains were exhumed. The anthropologists had kept his brain. For research, it had sat in a jar at the Smithsonian for 83 years. Even in death, they were still extracting value. The brain was finally cremated in 2000. Almost a century after his death, Ishi finally got to rest. But the knowledge they took, that's still out there, still being used, still generating value for everyone except the people it came from. That's the real story. Not that a language died, but that an entire economic model for sustainable human existence was deliberately destroyed and replaced with something that's running out of runway. Climate scientists warn about tipping points. Economists worry about debt spirals and resource constraints. Ecologists document the sixth mass extinction. Everyone recognizes our economic model can't continue indefinitely. But we're not studying the economic models that actually achieved sustainability, because those models were developed by populations we classified as primitive. And we can't admit the primitives solve problems we can't solve. The last giant who spoke our language died in 1916. What he said the day the soldiers arrived was a warning, not about violence, about economics, about what happens when you optimize for extraction instead of regeneration. We didn't listen then. We're still not listening now, but the pattern keeps repeating. Eventually, we're going to run out of populations to extract from, run out of knowledge to appropriate, run out of land to occupy. And when that happens, we're going to wish we had paid attention to what Ishi's grandfather knew. That booms always end. The land always remains. And if you don't plan for regeneration, you don't survive the crash. That's what the textbooks don't teach. What the economic models ignore. What Ishi tried to show us every day in that museum, making the same arrowheads over and over while anthropologists took notes. He was demonstrating sustainability. We thought he was demonstrating primitiveness. We were wrong, and that mistake is going to cost us everything the Yahi lost. Our resource base, our knowledge systems, our ability to survive in the landscapes we've occupied. The Yahi waited for the boom to end so they could return to equilibrium. We're still in the boom phase, still extracting, still growing, still convinced this time is different, that we've figured out how to sustain infinite growth on a finite planet. But Ishi's grandfather knew something we've forgotten. Booms always end. Always. The only question is whether you've planned for regeneration or destroyed the systems that make recovery possible. The Yahi planned for regeneration. We've destroyed it. And that difference might be the only thing that matters in the end.